Very good afternoon to all of you and welcome in my class, that is Daily Economics. And today we will discuss prices and inflation. Today we will see the concept of inflation. What is inflation? What are the types of inflation? And how is it measured? A very good afternoon, Sundar and Divya. Welcome in my class. Today we will discuss prices and inflation and the current trends and current data from economic survey. First of all, I would like to give some info about what is inflation, what are the types of inflation, and how is it measured, what is WPI and what is CPI. And after that, we will go into the detail of economic survey. Prices and inflation. What is inflation? Inflation is the increase in the general level of prices. When the general level of prices increases, it is called inflation. Inflation is a quantitative measure. Inflation is a quantitative measure. Is a quantitative measure of the rate at which the average price level of a basket of selected goods and services of an economy increases over a period of time. So this is called inflation. When inflation is a quantitative measure, it is the quantitative measure of the rate at which the average price level or the general price level of a basket of selected goods. We are talking about a basket of selected goods and services of an economy increases over a period of time. Where I will teach you what is WPI and CPI, wholesale price index and consumer price index. As far as wholesale price, these are the measurement of inflation in our economy, and when we will discuss when we talk about wholesale price index, it considers only goods. It considers the change in price of goods only. And when we talk about consumer price index, we take both the goods and services. We measure the change in price of goods and services, both of them. So inflation is a quantitative measure. It is the rate at which the average price level of a basket of goods and services. We are taking both goods and services of an economy because we measure our inflation from consumer price index. That's why we are taking goods and services both. And what are the types of inflation? There are two types of inflation. You must be aware of this. I will not go into the detail because I have to go into the detail of economic survey today. What are the types of inflation? There are two types of inflation. One is demand pull. Inflation. And the second is cost push. The second type is cost push inflation. And what are the reasons of demand pull inflation? The reasons of demand pull inflation is increase in money supply. The second reason is increment in wages. Third can be cut in interest rate. cut in interest rate. So these are the major reasons of demand pull inflation. What happens when there is increase in money supply? The purchasing power in the hand of households increases, and they demand more goods than they used to demand before. And what happens when there is cut in interest rate? When there is cut in interest rate, the investment rate increases. The investment increases in an economy, and as a result of increase in investment, the total demand of the economy increases. Good afternoon, dear student. Okay, cost push. As far as cost push inflation is concerned, the main reason is supply shock. The main reason is supply shock. This is called supply shock also. The second is increment in taxes, increased taxes like VAT and indirect taxes, increased taxes. And the third is trade unions. Trade union also increases the prices. Trade union. So these are the reasons behind cost push inflation, and these are the reason behind demand pull inflation. So these there are two types of inflation in the economy, and after that as a result of which, who are the losers in inflation and who are the gainers in inflation? This is also a very interesting question. Who are the losers and who are the winners in inflation? Who are the winners in inflation? Debtors. Debtor means who has taken loan. Debtors are among the winners, and creditors are the losers. Creditors are the losers during inflation. During inflation. Why? I will tell you. During inflation, debtors are the winners and creditors are the losers. Savers. Savers are also called losers during inflations, and fixed income holders like pensioners, fixed income holders are also losers during inflation. Fixed income holders are also called losers. And who are the winners? The debtors are the winners, the sellers are the winners, the firms are the winners. Why? Because as a result of inflation, the price increases. As a result of inflation, the price increases. So the value of money goes down. The value of money goes down. As a result of why they are called winners and why they are called losers. Why creditors are called losers during inflation and why debtors are called winners during inflation. As a result of inflation, reasons behind it, as a result of inflation, as a result of inflation, as a result of inflation, where a unit of currency by less than it did in prior periods. As a result of inflation, a unit of currency buy less than it did in prior periods. As a result of inflation, a unit of currency, not where, a unit of currency, result of inflation, a unit of currency buys less than it did in prior periods. That's why the the debtors are called winners and the creditors are called losers. And after that, the measurement of inflation. There are two types of measurement of inflation. Measurement of inflation. There are two type of index from which we measure the inflation. Mukesh, this is English channel, that's why I'm using all the contents in English, and there is one Hindi channel also. It is from 10 to 11 in the morning, so you can ask questions in Hindi also. There is no bar. There is I will reply all the questions that you will ask, but all the content will be in English. What I have told you, measurement of inflation, and I am going very slow, you can understand, and this will improve your personality, this will improve your English also. So they are dual benefit for you, right? Measurement of inflation, there are two type of indexes. First is wholesale price index. First is wholesale price index, which is called WPI. The first type of measurement is WPI, wholesale price index, and the second type of measurement is consumer price index. Consumer price index. Consumer price index, which is called CPI, right? So we can measure the inflation from WPI also and CPI also. This is called a factory, right? If this is a factory and the goods is going into some warehouse, this is warehouse, and this is market, this is market, and these are the consumers. These are the consumers. Okay, so if the product goes from the factory to the warehouse, we measure the change in the price of that product with the help of wholesale price index, right? When the goods goes from the factory to the warehouse, we measure the change in price with the help of wholesale price index. But from the warehouse it goes to the market, and after that it goes to the retailer shop, and from the retailer shop it goes to the consumer. So here we measure the change in prices with the help of consumer price index, right? So this is very clear. When it goes from factory to warehouse, we measure the change in price with the help of wholesale price index, and when it goes to the retailer shop or it goes to the consumer, we measure the change in price with the help of CPI or consumer price index. Now I will tell you what is WPI and what is CPI. WPI, wholesale price index, is used to measure the average change in price. Measure the average change in price. The average change in price in the sale of goods. Price in the sale of goods in bulk quantity. In the sale of goods in the bulk quantity. In the bulk quantity by the wholesaler. And what is CPI? There is one difference between CPI and WPI also. I will tell you that. What is CPI? Consumer price index. Consumer price index measures the change in price, of sale of goods and services, in the retailer's market. So the major difference between WPI and CPI, WPI, wholesale price index, measures the changes in the bulk quantity, okay, and it consider only goods. It measures the change in the prices of goods only, but as far as CPI is concerned, consumer price index is concerned, it measures goods as well as services, goods as well as services. So it considers goods only, but it measures the changes in goods and measures the price changes in price in goods and services both. Now, WPI is measured by Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Commerce and Industry. It is measured by Ministry of Commerce and Industry. It is measured by Ministry of Commerce and Industry, but Consumer Price Index is measured by MOSPI, Ministry of, this is called Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, Ministry of Stat and Program Implementation, Program Implementation. Program implementation. So, this is the major difference between WPI and CPI, wholesale price index and consumer price index. Wholesale price index considers the change in the price of goods only, but consumer price index, it considers the change in the price of goods and services both, and it is measured by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, but CPI is measured by the Ministry of Stat and Program Implementation, that is called MOSPI. And there are different type of CPI. CPI is a measure that examines the weighted average. CPI, it's called basket of goods, and there are 8 goods and services in the basket of CPI. 8 goods and services. 8 goods and services in the basket of CPI. What are these goods and services? First, food and beverages. First, food and beverages. Food and beverages. The second item in the basket of CPI is housing. The second item is housing. The third item in the basket of CPI is apparel. The third item is apparel. The fourth item in the basket of CPI is transportation. Transportation. The fifth item in the basket of CPI is medical care. Medical care. The second item is recreation. The second item is recreation or manoranjan. Recreation. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The seventh item is education. The seventh item is education. And the 8th item is other goods and services. Other goods and services. Goods and services. So, now there are 8 items in the basket of consumer price index. What are these items? First item is food and beverages. Second is housing, third is apparel, fourth is transportation, other goods and services, education, recreation and medical care. So, under the consumer price index, we measure the changes in the price and services of all these goods and services in the basket of CPI. Siaram Chaudhary ji and Mukesh ji, there is one Hindi channel also. I take both this channel. In Hindi channel, the timing is 10 to 11. In Hindi channel, the timing is 10 to 11. And this is the English channel. The timing of this English channel is 12 to 1. So, you can join this Hindi channel in the morning by which the timing of that is 10 to 11. Okay. Now, the measurement formula of consumer price index is equal to cost of market basket, cost of market basket basket in a year, in given year by cost of market basket in a base year, So this is the formula of measurement of CPI, Consumer Price Index. Now there are different type of CPI. First is I'll go into the next page. First is CPI-I. It means CPI-AL. First is CPI-AL, means CPI agriculture. CPI agriculture labor. Second is CPI-RL. It means rural labor. The third is CPI-IW. It means industrial worker. And the next is CPI-C. It means CPI combined. CPI combined means CPI rural plus CPI urban. So this is the concept of inflation and the different types of inflation and the measurement and the different type of measurement of inflation. The first type is wholesale price index. The second is consumer price index, and there are difference between WPI and CPI. Wholesale price index consider goods only, and consumer price index consider goods as well as services, the change in the price of goods and services both. Wholesale price index is measured by Ministry of Commerce and Industry, but consumer price index, it is measured by MOSPI, Ministry of Stat and Program Implementation. So these are the different types of inflation, and these are the different type of measurement of inflation. Now we will go into the detail of economic survey. What has happened with the price and inflation during 1 year? Okay. Inflation has been witnessing moderation. Witnessing moderation. It means it came down a little bit since 2014, backed by low food inflation. During the current financial year, however, food and beverages inflation has been trending differently. Food inflation has been on an upward trend. Food inflation. We have seen the price of onion also, we have seen the price of potato also. So the price of food and the price of the food has been trending on differently. Food inflation increased a lot. Has been on an upward trend. There was an upward trend in the food inflation, which is very much clear from the price of onion. It could reach 100 rupees per kg, and mainly backed by rising vegetable, fruit and pulses prices. So this is not a very unique thing. We have seen in daily economy that the vegetable prices were increasing, fruits prices increased a lot, and pulses prices also increased a lot. And it was highly seen in the price of vegetables like onion. So there has been an upward trend in the food inflation, and which was backed by vegetable, fruit and pulses prices. So if you are asked a question that what was the reason, what was the there was an upward trend in inflation, which is backed by which factors? So then which is backed by vegetable, fruit and pulses prices. Okay. Volatility in price of most of the essential agricultural commodity with some exceptions, like pulses has been on a downward trend since July 2018. Okay. Inflation has been declining in since 2012. There is evidence for a strong reversion of headline inflation to core inflation. Nothing. Okay. General inflation based on different price indices. This is wholesale price index, which is called WPI. This is consumer price index, which I have taught you right now. Okay. Now we will analyze the data of wholesale price index. The wholesale price index is the price index of the wholesale goods. We measure the change in the price of the wholesale good with the wholesale price index. We will take the data of 16-17, 17-18 and 2019-20. It was only 1.7% during 16-17, but it increased up to 3% in 2017-18. It further increased up to 4.3% during 18-19, and in the second quarter of 18-19 it increased up to 4.7%. So we see a rising trend in wholesale price index up to 2018-19, but in the first quarter of 19-20 it decreased up to 1.5. So we see a decreasing trend after 2018-19. When consumer price index combined, I have told you what is CPIC, consumer price index combined. It means price index of rural area plus price index of urban area. It was only 4.5% in 2016-17. After that it decreased 3.6% in 17-18. But after the 17-18 it again decreased up to 3.4% in 18-19. But after that in 2018-19 it increased up to 3.7%, and when we see the data, the recent data, it increased up to 4.1%, which is very much higher than the WPI indexes. CPI, industrial worker, agricultural labor and rural labor. These are the three different datas of industrial worker, agricultural labor and rural labor. Fall in food inflation has been a major contributing factor in the drastic reduction observed in inflation. It is observed that there is a fall in food inflation in the second quarter of 2019-20. In the first quarter of 2019-20 there was a increase in the food prices, but in the second quarter of the year there was fall in food inflation. Current trend in inflation. Okay, this is the current trend in inflation. This is a headline and non-food and food inflation. This is the data of, this is the curve of food inflation. You can see how it goes up and came down, and when we fully draw this line, we see that there are many ups and downs in food inflation, but after July, it is June 2019, after June 2019, there was an upward trend in the consumer price index of food inflation. So the food item, the price of food item, mainly vegetable, fruit, it increased after June 2019, and as a result of that there was an increasing trend in the food inflation. It was after June 2019. And when we see the non-food or non-fuel indices, it is non-food, is the line of non-food inflation. We see that there is not much increase. This is the food items, and this is the line of non-food items. So food items, it showed an upward trend, and the non-food item, it did not increase much. This has been led by a drastic fall in food inflation, which has fallen from 6.4% to 0.1%. And CPIC means Consumer Price Index combined headline inflation in December 2019. Inflation in December 2019 stood at 7.4%, while CPIC food inflation, we are talking about only food inflation, increased to 14%, and This was mainly because of the rise in vegetable prices. In December 2019, CPI combined December 2019, it stood at 7.5%, but CPI food inflation, it increased up to 14%, and the major reason behind that was increase in the vegetable prices, especially onion. Core non-food and non-fuel inflation has been increased to 3.8%. So the food inflation was greater. The food inflation was very much greater than the non-food inflation. We can draw this inference that the food inflation was greater than the non-food inflation. Now, inflation in selected group. When we measure the data of different groups, we see that food and beverages. When we talk about food and beverages, we measure it from 2019-20, 2018-19. We see that the food and beverages, the data was 0.7% only. It was 0.7% only. The CPI of food and beverages was 0.7% only in 2018-19. But after that, in 2019-20, it increased up to 4.8%. There was a sharp increase in the food inflation. The CPI of food and beverages increased from 0.7 to 4.8%. But when we analyze these data and we see the price of pulses and products also, it was negative. The price was minus 8.3, the CPI was minus 8.3, but into 2019-20 it increased up to 7.8%. So there was a sharp increase in the prices of pulses and product also. It was minus 8.3 into 18-19, and it thus increased up to 7.8%. And as far as meat and fish is concerned, the consumer price index of meat and fish we analyze, and after analysis we see that it was only 4% in 2018-19, and it became just double. It became 9%. It became 9% during 2019-20. So these are the items in which there was a sharp increase in inflation. During 1920, wholesale price index based inflation has been on a continuous fall. WPI inflation, I have told you, wholesale price index was lesser than the consumer price index. It has seen a continuous fall, declining from 3.2% in April 2019 to 0.6% in November 2019, but it increased to 2.6% in December 2019. WPI inflation, wholesale price index. Wholesale price index, when we see that it was very much in April 2007, but after that there is a very slow increase in the wholesale price index, but in August and up to August and December 2019 it increased up to 4%, but it is always lesser than the CPI. Since July, CPI urban inflation has been consistently above CPI rural. Okay, CPI urban inflation, consumer price index of urban area, has been consistently above. It was always greater than the CPI rural area. This in contrast with the earlier experience where rural inflation has been mostly higher. But before that, during 2018-19, this is the data of 1920, but prior, it means 18-19, the CPI rural area was always greater than the CPI urban area. But it was seen that during 1920, CPI consumer price index of urban area was higher than the consumer price index in rural area. Now we see that this is the CPI urban area, this is the CPI urban, and This is CPI rural. This is CPI rural. During October 2019 and December 2019, we see that both are increasing, but CPI urban area is greater, consumer price index of urban area is greater than the consumer price index of rural area. This is very clear from this graph. And before that, the CPI rural area, we see that in the October 2016 up to Feb 2017, the CPI rural area was greater than the CPI urban area. But after that during 2018-19, this is CPI urban area is greater than CPI rural area. So there has been a sudden change in the trend. There has been a sudden change in the trend. July 2019, urban area have registered much higher food inflation. The urban area has registered much higher food inflation when compared to rural areas. This is rural urban CPI food inflation. We can see that this is the rural food inflation and this is the urban food inflation. This is the urban area. This is the urban area food inflation and this is the rural area food inflation. You can see that before 2018-19, the urban food prices were lower than the rural food prices, but after that during 2019, from January 2019 to December 2019, the urban food prices kept on increasing and it was always higher than the rural food prices. Divergence in rural urban food inflation was mainly led by cereals, eggs, fruits, vegetables. These were the main there was divergence in rural urban food inflation. The urban food inflation was always higher. The urban food inflation, we saw right now that it is always higher than the rural food inflation, And what is the reason behind that? The reason behind that, the increase in the price of cereals, eggs, fruits and vegetable in urban areas. This is CPI inflation rate of cereals. Okay, the consumer price index of this is the rural area and this is the urban area. This is the urban area, this is the rural area. You can see that the price of pulses were higher in the urban areas than in the rural areas. Okay, and this is the rate of vegetable in urban area and rural area. You can see the rate of vegetable in the rural area is less than the rate of vegetable in the urban areas. Now, inflation rate of fruits. You can also see that the inflation rate of fruits in urban area is greater than the inflation rate of fruit in the rural area. So all these items were higher, the rate of these items were higher in the urban area or the city area, and all these prices, the rate were lower in the rural area or the village area. So there was divergence in the rate of rural area and urban area. This is the rate of eggs in the urban area and the rural area. You can see that the rate of egg in the urban area was higher than the rural area. So these are very much clear from these diagrams that the rate of all the food items, mainly vegetable, fruit, eggs, they were higher in the urban area than the lower area. So the CPI, consumer price index of urban area, was higher than the consumer price index in the rural area. But before that, we are talking about the 2019-20. Before that, it was higher in the rural area. So there is a sudden change in the trend of CPI inflation. Okay, year on year growth of average real wage rate for agriculture worker. Okay, this is the rate of agriculture worker. We can see that the rate of agriculture worker, it went down, and because of that, the slide in rural inflation, the rural inflation What is there is price divergence between the rural area and the urban area. The price of food items in the rural area is lesser than the urban area. What is the reason behind that? The slide in rural inflation could be because of fall in the growth of real rural wages. It doesn't mean that the productivity increased. The real culprit was the rural wages, the decline in rural wages. So this curve this is very clear from this curve. We see that the rate of wages in the agricultural labor goes down. Component wise rural and urban inflation. Okay, pan, tobacco, clothing, housing, fuel and light. Okay, now we are running short of time. Inflation in state. Inflation in a state. There is one graph for that. You can see the inflation in different state. The highest inflation is in Manipur. The inflation rate in Manipur is the highest. Okay, and after that we see that the second is Lakshadweep. The second at the topmost level it is Manipur. If we analyze the state wise inflation, Manipur tops the list. After that Lakshadweep, and after Lakshadweep this is Nagaland. So this is you can analyze, you can compare the price inflation in different states of India. Now, this was the topic of price and inflation and the current data of price and inflation. And what we saw that the price inflation in the urban area is higher than the price inflation in the rural area. And what was the reason behind that? In the urban area, the price of vegetable, fruit and eggs, they increased. So there is a divergence between the rate of food items in rural area and urban area, and we measure all these changes in the prices by wholesale price index and consumer price index. And I have taught you what is the difference between wholesale price index and consumer price index. Wholesale price index measures the weighted value of wholesale goods, but consumer price index measures there are 8 goods and services in the basket of consumer price index. And CPI is measured by MOSPI, which is called Ministry of Stat and Program Implementation, and WPI is measured by Commerce and Industry. So that's all from this class. And if you want to ask something, if you have some query, if you have some question, you can ask. You can ask questions in Hindi also. And in the next class, till then, goodbye.